Just a quick laying of the foundations before my next video. And by the way, I don't know when I will release my next full video. I mean, again, I've kind of just been busy with a lot of other stuff on the side. So making videos is kind of taking a back seat. I'm not really all that into YouTube anymore, to be honest. So I don't know when I'll be making the next full length one, but I figure I'll just go ahead and lay the foundations here. So you may not get a full understanding for the context from this, quick snippet alone. But at least it'll give you an idea of where we're headed. So basically the idea is, there should be a difference between people who can actually show their work versus people who merely tell. So it's kind of like, at least here in the US and a lot of states and a lot of schools, in kindergarten, you have this thing called show and tell, where, the kids will kind of bring in some item or something that means a lot to them. They'll kind of show it to the class and explain it to them. You kind of want to think about all work as being like that, but of course not just at a simple kindergarten level, but really at a much broader and deeper and richer level as well. You want people who can actually stand there and show you something and tell you about it, not just tell you about their content or their material or their work, but actually show you something. And so what does it mean to show your work? Well, we're essentially talking about evidence here. But when I talk about evidence, I don't just mean like empirical evidence. Empirical evidence is what the scientific method works with, right? So that's one type of evidence. But there's other types of evidence that we could talk about. There's unempirical types. I mean, even if you want like a STEM example, which is, it's non-scientific, but it's still within STEM. STEM being that acronym which stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So yeah, I mean, if you want an unempirical form of evidence that's still within STEM, I mean, you could look at mathematics. Now, the thing about mathematics is, we don't often think of it as providing evidence per se, because it seems to be more rigorous than that. It's more about proofs and evidence. But I'll dig into that in the future, how or why that can be considered evidence in the sense of actually showing something, right? I mean, you can show somebody how putting two items next to two items is four items there, unless some items appear or disappear, it's going to be four, barring any sorts of other universes out there I want to talk about where that would differ. But just, given our framework of mathematics, that's just how it is, and you can show that to somebody. So more complex mathematical equations and formulas, they're basically just more complex versions of that, of just showing somebody that 2 next to 2 is 4. So yeah, I mean, and then even outside of STEM, so mathematics is just an unempirical example that's still within STEM, but there's other examples of, showing work that we can look at outside of STEM as well. And that's where we could start to talk about something that I call critical evidence, which basically relates to what I talked about way back in my video where I was going over, how to tell what truth is without telling somebody what the truth is. I was saying that, okay, if something's like an absolute truth, it should be true in any and all contexts, because that's just what it means for something to be absolute, and therefore there shouldn't be any axioms or non-axioms or any sort of stuff whatsoever that can stand as an alternative to that truth. It should be able to survive any and all contexts, even its own negation, so on and so forth. And so anything that, fills things up that broadly, that essentially qualifies as truth to an absolute extent. So that's basically what critical evidence is. So it's very broad. It's too broad to be empirical. It's too broad to even be mathematical. But if you do find stuff which is that broad and is sort of unalterable, okay, well, the fact that it's unalterable and unbreakable is a form of showing that it may very well be the case. So it is a form of evidence, right? So if we think of evidence as just showing something that indicates that what you're looking at may be a fact, right? It may be a truth. It may be true to some sort of extent, an absolute extent if we're talking about absolute truth, or an empirical extent if we're talking about an empirical truth, or a mathematical extent if we're talking about a mathematical truth. Just basically evidence is showing something that indicates that what you're looking at may be true in whatever context of truth you're talking about, empirical, unempirical, mathematical, absolute, whatever. Just it shows something. That's what we mean by evidence. So now it should also therefore be pointed out that evidence does not always automatically prove something to be conclusively true. So yeah, of course, we do need to be able to tell the difference between something having evidence and something being conclusively proven. But that's something we'll kind of dig into in the future as well, once we kind of go into more of the full-length details. But what evidence does do is it at least shows that there's something there. So again, I've kind of made reference to physics in the past. So think about it this way. When Einstein came along, as I've kind of mentioned in past videos, he really showed us that there was more outside of Newtonian physics or Newtonian mechanics. Now, therefore, you could say that all the past evidence for Newtonian mechanics had been overthrown. But in a sense, not really, because when Einstein came along, he really just showed that there were further contexts under which we needed new tools and new types of physics to work with beyond Newtonian physics. So really, he did not disprove Newtonian physics. Like everything here in your everyday life, this stuff still works perfectly fine within a Newtonian context. So Newtonian physics, it's not incorrect. It's still correct. It's just that it's incomplete. Einstein showed that there's stuff further than it. So while it is correct, it's not complete. So that's basically what evidence does. Evidence can at least show you something that's there, even if what's there is not necessarily complete or not necessarily conclusive or not necessarily conclusively proven. So that's where evidence is still something important to hold alongside truth. And again, that's where we need to look at, a variety of types of evidence, not just empirical evidence, but unempirical types, even more critical or unalterable types, which deals a little bit more with some of the mystical but non-spiritual topics that I talk about a lot. So you really need to look at all these types because, again, evidence, it's not just this cold, methodical, scientific approach. It's really pointing at something larger than science. It's really about, can you show somebody what you're talking about? It's often said that, a teacher merely tells people what's there while a master can show somebody what's there. And I'm not just using the term master in a sort of spiritual or Zen context. I mean, like, for example, even if you do look in the scientific domain, professors and researchers can show you their work. Now, of course, the type of showing or the type of evidence that they're using is empirical evidence, but it's still a form of showing your work, right? For obvious reasons. So that's more masterful. It's kind of like if you ever watched a lot of cartoons or anime when you were a kid, like, for example, think of just a random one, like Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you ever watched that, I'm Gen Z, so I did. But okay, when a master bender wanted to teach somebody how to bend, they didn't just tell them how to do it. No, they showed them how to do it. They went through the moves. They gave a demonstration. That's what makes the difference between just teaching something and actually showing something in a more masterful way. And that's kind of what we're trying to get at. So, not just showing stuff in a scientific context, right? Because we're not just talking about empirical evidence, but also giving other forms of demonstrations, right? There's empirical demonstrations, yes, but there's also unempirical demonstrations. I mean, again, you can give a mathematical demonstration about a specific equation or formula. That's very abstract and very unempirical, but it's a demonstration nonetheless. You can give critical demonstrations with critical evidence, kind of showing how something is unalterable and unbreakable, like what I talked about in that video about what truth is, stuff like that. You can find all sorts of stuff that can be shown, whether it's in an empirical sense or a non-empirical sense or just whatever sense whatsoever, just as long as it can be shown rather than merely told. That's what creates a difference. And honestly, I'm a little bit concerned that my audience is not going to be very receptive to this. I feel like I'm going to be labeled as being very quote-unquote materialistic or unconscious or whatever, because I feel like having come from a spiritual background and having a largely spiritual audience, I feel like the big thing is to base things on direct experience. And going forward, the big thing you're going to hear me saying is that direct experience just simply is not enough. Direct experience does not mean that what you directly experienced is true. Kind of like what I was saying in my last video, like, you can directly experience the solidity of the desk. And so it seems like the desk is made of all sorts of matter and stuff in an empirical context, but no, that's not even true in an empirical context, let alone any sorts of unempirical context that may or may not be there. The solidity of the desk comes from fields, not just interlocking particles. So yeah, the direct, a direct experience does not tell you what the status of that direct experience is. All a direct experience tells you is that, well, you directly experienced whatever you directly experienced. It does not tell you what the status of the experience is. It does not tell you whether or not your experience speaks for everybody's experience, right? So it does not tell you that it's like, let's say, an objective truth rather than some subjective truth that's only subjectively true for your experience. Like, how do you know that when you experience something that experience speaks for all of reality rather than only speaking for your experience? It's possible that you can have an experience that does speak for more than your experience alone. That is something that can happen. But that's the point, is we need to know the difference. We need to know the difference between just having a direct experience versus having a direct experience that speaks for more, that's deeper and even more direct than direct experience itself, something broader, something bigger, something deeper. So what creates that difference? So the idea there is that truth is not just based on direct experience. Direct experience alone is not good enough. You need direct experience plus more. And that plus more deals a lot with this, ability to show something, whether, again, it does not have to be empirical. That's one way to show it, but there's all sorts of other ways to show it. So yeah, it's really just all about going back to who can give a demonstration. And so really that has been a big game changer in my epistemic approach to everything, not just judging and criticizing my own work, but being able to judge and criticize and discern high quality versus low quality in other people's work, is actually, asking them, okay, can you show me something? Can you give me a demonstration, rather than just standing there telling me that you had a direct experience, or that you heard this, or you saw this, or you experienced that, or you became conscious of that, or you meditated and embodied this or that. Like, don't just tell yourself that, oh, I experienced something and therefore it's true. No, you got to go further than telling. You got to show. You got to show it. It's not even just about showing it to other people. It's about showing it to yourself as well. Because see, a direct experience does not even show something to you. Now, yeah, okay, if you have a direct experience of something, you could say it was shown to you in the sense that, well, you experienced it, you saw it, you were conscious of it, whatever. But that's not what we mean by showing. We mean showing something in a much more rigorous sense, where, again, it's either unalterable, like what critical evidence shows, or it's got some sort of empirical, sort of unbreakable context to it, which is there independent of the metaphysics, kind of like this desk is just there independent of the metaphysics. Like, if it has something unalterable like that, then that actually shows more than just the fact that, well, you experienced it or you saw it or so on and so forth. So yeah, that's still a little bit vague right now. And again, I'll dig into the details on this stuff more in the future, but this is all just kind of laying the groundwork. Really, we are getting kind of more into the mainstream. I'm not going to lie to you. This does get into like mainstream academic topics much more than it does spiritual topics, but my goal is to actually basically take the mystical as far as I can, take it as far into the mainstream as I can. I'm not trying to be sort of like a middle ground Ken Wilber here. I'm trying to actually go all the way with this and sort of vacuum all the oxygen out of the bag and see what survives in that harsh environment. So I'm getting as rigorous and as mainstream as possible. And there is more here beyond just the mainstream anyways. We're really talking about something which goes deeper than that, something which has more core importance than any of that stuff, because it really, again, goes back to who can give a demonstration and who can only tell you something, or say that they saw something, or say they experienced something, or had an experience of something, right? Like, there is a big difference there, and that's what we need to dig into. So we'll dig into those details more in the future. Hopefully this was clear enough, at least just as a general foundation, and I'll see you all next time. Create a nice day.